On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Arkadiy Tetelman. He is the head of application and infrastructure security at Chime. We're going to be covering a few different topics, but really centered around security culture, how to scale that within your company, looking to establish a security champion, and what's happening with the shift away from being black box security to part of the core engineering team. And we're going to talk about how Arkadiy celebrates the wins and kind of helps establish that culture. And thrilled to have him here. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. So I guess just to kind of set context for anyone who's listening who might not be familiar with you, could you give us a little idea of what you do at Chime and a little bit about what Chime does, and we'll go from there?
Yeah, so Chime is a mobile banking platform. And what I work on there is application and infrastructure security, kind of a dual team mandate. So for application security, we focus on securing the code that developers write, making sure that they're not introducing vulnerabilities, managing our bug bounty program, getting pen tests, other things like that. And then for infrastructure security, we use AWS. So we're really focused on cloud or AWS security.
Awesome. So I guess, and obviously our pre-call, we talked about, culture and security. I guess just to kind of start talking about that as the focus of this section of the podcast, like when you're talking about security and culture, and you've been at some really good companies, right? So if anyone's not familiar with his background, I mean, he spent some time at Airbnb, Twitter, Lob, some, Chime now. So good background, and you've seen, the growth of application security and its maturation and kind of the progress. But what does good security culture look like? I mean, what have you seen that stands out?
Well, the thing is that in most organizations, the majority of the security work, I would say, happens outside of the security organization. It's mostly done by engineering and product. They're the ones patching software, fixing vulnerabilities, applying updates, doing other things like that. And the security team is not in any of their reporting chains. So we can't go to someone and say, you must fix this bug. We can't order people around. And, even if we were in their reporting chain, we probably wouldn't want to lead like that. So a good security culture is one where you can approach people and get work scheduled onto their roadmaps, where people are receptive to hearing from you and getting your input and feedback, where they will voluntarily report things that they see and say, hey, this looked suspicious to me. Do you want to take a look at this? Or can you review this design document or this code review or whatever it is? That to me is kind of what I think of when you say good security culture.
Gotcha. And when you're looking at those relationships and even with yourself, like, when you started at Chime, for instance, you've been there for a little bit of time, but when you first get in there and you're trying to evaluate this culture, are there certain things that you're looking for that you can address quickly? And there's some things that you're like, well, listen, this is going to be a longer tail, adjustment in terms of maybe how to align culture better?
Mostly, I think it's longer term adjustment. Unless you're entering a new company and org where like it already has a mature program, it's been doing it for a while. A lot of times you join a company, they might not have that set up just yet. And so you're often trying to lay the groundwork and slowly shift culture. And culture is very hard to shift. It takes a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you don't want something too fast because you're going to provide a jolt to the system. So slow and steady.
Yeah, that and also I'll just say that most of the time, I think a lot of people have had negative experiences with security people in the past. They've worked with security Nazis, I'll call them. And so a lot of times, if you enter an organization, then it takes time to you have to work through people's emotional security baggage that they have from previous experiences. They're so used to working with security teams sometimes that will just say no or might get angry or not feel approachable. And so it takes time to work through that and show people that no, we do things differently here. You can come to us for help. We are here as a resource for you. Let's work together and figure this out. That sort of stuff.
Interesting. So I guess when you do find somebody who's, had that bad experience in the past and they might view security as as a burden or as an extra challenge, and they're like, well, I just want to get this done. You're impeding me. Are there any things that you've seen that typically work to kind of help disarm that person?
Yeah, I will try to explain things in terms of impact. A lot of times I think people don't like to be told what to do, but if you explain to someone why it is that you're asking someone to do the particular thing and say, here's the impact, if you don't implement this control, then this data could leak, or here's how someone could access this thing, or here's what I'm worried about. Just explaining your thought process can be very helpful to people. a lot of times they are under constraints from they have deadlines to hit or their manager is telling them to do certain things. And so working within those constraints and saying, okay, maybe you can't do this thing right now, but can we do this quick win that doesn't fix it fully, but it's something? And then can we get it on your backlog? Can you commit to fixing it by this date? Like getting any sort of concessions that I can and sort of working with them that way.
Do you see the, I guess, like part of the shift being people who have had a different perception of security? Like, I mean, you've been in security engineering for a while, application security engineering. Are you seeing a shift from people viewing it as the black box and, oh, I got to deal with this versus now potentially, an advocate, a partner, somebody who's there to help? Like, has that relationship slowly been changing over the years of what you've observed?
Hopefully, yes. I mean, I think that at the companies that I've worked at some of these more forward organizations, that's kind of how you want things to work. The industry as a whole, I don't know that it's been moving as quickly. I think that sometimes a lot of people still do have to deal with some of the more other older model of security, I'll put it, where people are more like, here are the requirements that I'm giving you to fix this thing, patch this software. Like, here's a ticket with this due date. Like, I'm going to give you work and you must complete it. And there's no negotiation or discussion. It's a very like one directional conversation.
Yeah, it's I think the shift that's happening and the assimilation more with the similar engineering tools seems to be new. I mean, it seems that if you're going to talk to the DevOps team about where we're using similar tools and we're here to help you, the SRE team, when you're looking at that process of potentially establishing a champion, right? I guess from your experience, who do you choose to be the champion? Maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else on the team. How does that work in terms of looking to establish somebody that's trying to be the advocate for the security team?
So security champions have all sorts of different forms at different companies. When I've worked at smaller companies, we didn't even have people who were formally assigned. It was just we had a Slack channel, or you could have an email list, whatever, and we would send out informational, just articles we thought that were interesting, like send out stuff and have some discussion about it. And maybe sometimes it would be like, oh, well, can we do this thing that some other company is doing? Or is there any learning for us to take away from this? At larger companies, you very well could have a dedicated role where someone is formally assigned, they have responsibilities, they might have to attend some meetings every once in a while to share what's going on with they're embedded within a team and they'll share updates about what's going on in that team. And then there's everything in between, right? It really depends on, there's no one size fits all, I would say.
Yeah, I guess you have to identify the right person that'll be the right voice, I suppose. Like you have to make sure each organization has its own culture. And I guess as you're helping facilitate, for the security and the champion, what do you do to help, I guess, bolster and provide, some wins to the team to celebrate those wins? Like what are some things that you've seen that help kind of recognize those and kind of brings it out into the, larger part of the organization?
So I think there's two parts. I think actually your previous question was about like how do you actually choose the people, and it's never been particularly hard because within an organization it becomes very clear who are the people who are naturally like pro security and will proactively work with you and volunteer information or volunteer to pick up tasks or something. Maybe like 10% of the people I would say are quite security enthusiastic, and the middle 80% will tolerate you and the bottom 10% will actively work against you. And so that top 10%, it just becomes very obvious who are the people who are enthusiastic and passionate and want to be more involved. And so you just provide them information and provide them tasks or ideas, or you have conversations with them, and it just things kind of naturally happen and it works out great. How do you celebrate wins? Whatever fits the company culture. I mean, we have like a shout outs channel on Slack where we'll say, hey, so and so did this thing. And I love to give people shout outs. And I'll say, like, here's why this thing is important. And, they did it and great, good job. At previous companies, we had a newsletter we would send out where we would just give like a rolled up summary of like, here's some of the wins we had this past month. Thanks to all these people for working on these things. It just depends on the company culture.
Gotcha. So you mentioned, obviously, I think it's a fair breakdown that there's certain percentages of people that are going to be aligned, they don't care. And then you'll have a certain percentage of people that might be working against. And you mentioned, obviously, those people with bad experiences. I guess when you're looking to maybe help the champion, right? I guess this might be specific. And if you haven't come across this scenario, that's okay. Let's say you have a champion or someone who's out there and trying to promote this, and you hear about somebody that's potentially undermining you, right? Or maybe just kind of being a little bit of an anchor. Have you had to tackle that? I mean, how would you tackle that?
Yeah, there's always people, like I said, who are going to be working against you. Either they had bad experiences, or they just philosophically disagree, or they might feel like you're stepping into their territory and maybe they feel threatened or something like that. Whatever the reason, I mean, I try and approach people and just be candid and extend an olive branch and be vulnerable. Try and, again, clearly explain my thoughts and my reasoning and why I think this thing is important. And if there's really no, someone has to be kind of willing to engage with you on a certain level. And sometimes if someone is not willing to engage with you, then it doesn't matter what it is that you say, you might not get the outcome that you're looking for. And then at that point, you might, depending on the severity of the issue, start escalating up the manager chain or something like that, just the normal interpersonal type stuff at large companies.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's never a comfortable situation. I think this particular area or any other area, I think represents similar challenges. So interesting to hear. That's got to be the way you attack. But I think you'd mentioned to me about engineers that are curious, right? Developers that are curious about security and helping kind of flourish some of their interests and kind of maybe help kind of distribute some of the knowledge in terms of that side of developers that are curious about security. What are some things that you've seen help developers or engineers kind of, maybe come over to the security side or at least get a lot more involved than before?
So we'll send out things like one of my favorite things to send out is bug bounty write ups. I call it Fireside Bug Bounty. And so we'll just send these very detailed write ups of our bug bounty program. When we receive a valid report, here's what the issue was, here's how you could reproduce it, here's a proof of concept, here's the impact that someone could have done X, Y, and Z, and here's how we fixed this particular instance of the issue. And here's maybe some of our opinions on how could we fix this entire vulnerability class. What would that look like within the company? So we'll send out these and I love being open about it. I think sometimes people are, again, maybe it's more of like security old school thinking, I think, but like we have to hide the vulnerabilities. We have to protect this information. It's sensitive. We can't let anyone know. We have to be worried about legal discovery and things like that. And I very much have the opposite. Like, let's be open and transparent. If we receive a vulnerability, if we receive a pen test, I want to shout it from the rooftops. I want to send it out to the whole company. I want everyone to read it. So making information available that way, I find a lot of people are very naturally curious with security and they just don't know where to get started or how to get involved. And if you start providing that information, then they just eat it up and they become so much better to work with and they're very happy to come out and reach out to you.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think what's becoming the big trend when talking to a lot of people in security is the shift left and getting engineers more involved using similar tool sets and kind of having that collaboration versus maybe before it was a lot more silo. Like you mentioned, here's a bunch of stuff, go do it. And potentially security engineers are having to evolve their skill sets and update them and kind of come up to speed with other tools. What are you seeing with on the security engineering teams that you've had, and all of a sudden there's a shift in skills? What have you seen in terms of that evolution of needing to pick up those additional skills, or kind of updating what you've been working with in the past?
It's super critical. I really think that people who have developer backgrounds make the best security engineers. People in security have all sorts of different backgrounds. There's no one path, but I find that when people start off studying security right away, because that's a thing that's offered in school now, or they purely have a offensive background and maybe they did bug bounties or something, I don't know. When people don't have a strong developer background, I think that one, they can't get in the weeds and fix things themselves, which sometimes as a security engineer you'll have to do. There just might not be anyone available to fix an issue. This part of the system might be unowned, or it's a tragedy of the commons, or what have you, and it's a severe enough issue where like we just have to do it ourselves. So I think it's really important to have the capability to do that. And the second reason is that I think, security is all about trade-offs. We're always trying to weigh the business risk of a particular control or risk or what have you against the benefits that'll bring us and against the cost of implementing that change. And so when people have a developer background, I think they make better trade-offs because they're able to understand like the cost of the thing that they're proposing. They're not going to propose some sort of like, let's build this like super advanced that's going to like ingest all this stuff and alert on all these things and it's going to do everything. And it's like, have you considered the cost of building that or like the cost that you're asking the other team to take on? So I think that again, people who have developer backgrounds, they propose more reasonable solutions.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's interesting. I know the one thing that we were kind of touch on as well, and it was something that you'd mentioned before, and I thought it's an interesting thing from a security engineering perspective. You along the way created your own startup, correct?
Yes. After I had left my previous company and before I joined Chime, there was a period of 3 months where I was working on this startup, this security product called LogSnitch, and I was trying to build that out and sell it.
When you kind of were going through and kind of observing the product in your mind, and I don't talk to a lot of security people that actually created their own startups. I'm kind of curious, like what were you seeing that kind of drew you towards saying, "Hey, I want to solve this for a bigger audience"?
So again, at my last company, this was an internal product that I had built at the company. What it did was it ingested audit logs from G Suite and from Okta, and it pushed them into our SIM. We were using Elastic at the time, and then I was able to write a bunch of alerts around, someone made a Google Drive file public to the internet, or someone changed this admin setting, or a new user got onboarded, or we had like more than 100 alerts. And it was very valuable to us. We got a bunch of business value out of it. And I had many peers at other companies who had built the same things internally at their companies. So I thought, why is everyone building this thing from scratch? Let me just build it the one time and I think I can do it better. And also at the time, I was very into the indie hacker scene. So I'm like, I definitely should just build this out and make it a company. Like, I can make this work. And so that's what I tried to do. I was working on it. It took me, 2 months to build my minimum version of the product. And then the next month after that, I just stopped all coding and I went full sales mode. It was never able to find a customer. And so I don't know, it didn't end well, but I'm glad that I tried.
I mean, you saw an opportunity, you went to tackle it. I think it's always tricky, especially if it's just you wearing multiple hats. That's got to be a challenge. I always like to ask people that kind of went down the entrepreneur path and, maybe it didn't work as well as they were hoping, but always about lessons learned. Like, I mean, in terms of if what did you learn? If you had to do it again, what would you have done different, if anything?
So as part of this like indie hacker scene, and I was reading all these forums and everyone's like, validate the market, validate the product, do as little as you can in terms of actual product work before you do any of those things. Maybe you can even get your first sale without having a product or writing any code. And to me, that always seemed like I read it and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, but that'll never work for this. Like, let me build something and then I can sell it to people. And now I feel like I have actually internalized that advice and genuinely believe it. I think if I were to try something again, I would not spend any time on the product. I would start reaching out to people, doing customer interviews, see if I could find anyone who was like, yes, I need this so much, I will pay you right now. Like, go build this thing for me, which is very hard. But, don't waste 2 months building something if you're not going to get a sale at the end of it.
That is good advice. I think the ambition to go tackle something, obviously you're an engineer that had found a solution to a bigger problem. And obviously, it sounded like, I think when you described it to me, I'm not in security, but I was like, it sounds interesting. But I guess, yeah, it's always, finding that fit. And I guess that other hat becomes very time consuming and draining in terms of the efforts. And I guess, trying to actually find the fit before you build. I think that's the flip side too, because I guess you then it's kind of like this. Well, I have to deliver all my promises, and I think there's a bit of a component to that which plays on your mind. So I think either way you go, that stress is probably right there in front of you, no matter what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think the idea might have legs. I still maybe in the future would like to return to it. I don't know what it would look like. I might modify it, but I think if I was better on the sales side, sometimes I'm like, well, would it have worked? I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Interesting. Well, who knows? Maybe somebody listening to the podcast has done sales and security, and will reach out, and it'll be an interesting match. I don't. I'm just kidding, obviously.
I would love that.
That'd be wild if it turned. I just remember the little people when it all goes big.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. I was going to say, like, it's been fantastic getting your insights on, security culture and kind of, what you've done in terms of, trying to establish the right culture, the wins, and how to help, work against, people that might not be on the same team as you, but you still need to win them over. So I appreciate it. If someone's going to want to reach out and talk to you or ask you questions, follow up, or want to potentially help sell, the solution on the Locksnitch side, is LinkedIn, Twitter, is there preferred, avenue for somebody to reach out to you?
Yeah, Twitter DMs would work great. My Twitter DMs are open, and my Twitter handle is Arkadiy, Arkadiy. That would probably be the best way.
Cool, man. We'll put that in the show notes. So if anyone wants to kind of reach out and talk about anything on the podcast with Arkadiy, feel free. He's a great conversation. I've enjoyed chatting with him. Again, thank you for being on the podcast. And that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be back with another guest, different set of topics. Hopefully, you guys are finding value listening to the podcast and always looking for new suggestions. I've actually now been getting, I've been contacting a lot of security engineers about topics, and I've been getting a steady inflow of topics I'm trying to cover. So if there's something that stands out, let me know. I'm always trying to line that with a guest that might want to talk about it. And we'll be back next week. Thanks.